They told him the K-9 unit MZ-12 died overseas. That was a lie. When Marine Ryan Cole found a half-frozen German Shepherd locked in a cage under the Colorado snow, the dog had his unit's tattoo and Ryan's own classified frequency burned into its ear. Within hours, the same encrypted radio signal from a disbanded Marine division came alive. What he rescued wasn't a dog. It was evidence. Stay till the end to see how one act of mercy exposed a secret the military tried to erase. Like, share, and subscribe if loyalty still means something to you. The storm moved in fast, a white curtain swallowing the Colorado mountains before dusk had a chance to settle. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole had been driving for nearly 2 hours, the hum of the tires and the low drone of the heater keeping rhythm with the quiet inside his chest. He was on leave, forced leave technically. His last mission overseas had left a mark the doctors called temporary fatigue, though the night still carried echoes he couldn't quite silence. All he wanted was stillness, the kind you can only find in snow and pine and distance from everything that demanded something of you. His Ford F-150 groaned up the winding road toward the small cabin that sat alone near Timber Ridge. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle and the headlights painted 2 narrow tunnels through the white chaos. Outside, the wind screamed like it had something to prove. He tightened his hands on the steering wheel. He'd faced sandstorms and gunfire, but there was something about mountain storms. They didn't hate you. They just didn't care whether you made it home. The road curved past a bend where the guardrail ended. For a split second, a glint of metal flickered in the snowdrift ahead not far from the tree line. It wasn't the natural glimmer of ice. It was sharp, deliberate. Ryan eased off the gas instincts rising before thought. The truck slid a few feet before the chains caught and gripped. He sat still, engine idling, listening. No headlights behind, no movement except the wind. He shut off the engine and stepped out. Cold hit him like a wall. Snow stung his face and filled the tracks of his boots before he'd taken 5 steps. The beam of his flashlight sliced through the blizzard, catching the shape again, a corner of metal half buried. He knelt, brushed away a layer of ice, and found a cage. Steel bars thick, welded tight. Not the kind you'd buy for a pet, but a transport crate meant for strength and security. Someone had used it and left it here to die under the storm. He swept the light inside and stopped breathing for a moment. A German Shepherd lay crumpled against one side, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of its chest. Its fur was dark with blood and snow, and its front paw twisted unnaturally beneath it. The eyes opened slowly, amber, clear, alert, despite the exhaustion. They met his and didn't flinch. There was calculation there, a kind of quiet recognition that Ryan hadn't seen in years. He crouched lower. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice rough but gentle, the way you talk to a wounded soldier. "You're okay now." His gloved hands reached for the wire sealing the latch shut. Whoever had done this hadn't used a lock, just a coat hanger twisted tight enough to cut into the metal. Ryan pulled a multi-tool from his pocket, the movement automatic. It took several turns before the wire snapped free. The door creaked open. The dog didn't move. It watched him, breath-shallow pupils steady. Ryan slid off his field jacket and set it inside. "Smell that," he murmured. Warmth, not danger. The Shepherd lowered its head, pressed its nose against the coat, and then tried to stand. It failed once, then again, and on the 3rd effort managed to drag itself forward until its muzzle touched the open air. Ryan lifted it carefully. The body was lighter than it should have been, muscle gone thin, ribs sharp. He carried the animal against his chest, shielding it from the wind, feeling the tremor in its breathing. The truck's cabin welcomed them with the faint smell of coffee and engine oil. He laid the dog on the passenger seat, wrapped the coat around it, and turned the heater up. The fan whined. Steam rose from the fur as the snow melted. Under the dashboard light, Ryan studied the collar, black nylon military grade torn near the buckle. A small steel plate was bolted to the side. Most of the engraving was scratched, but he could make out a few letters, USMC K9 unit, and a partial coordinate. His throat tightened. He'd worked with Marine K9s before in the heat and noise of a different world. Those dogs had eyes like this one, tired but still watching everything. He brushed the dog's ear aside gently. There, hidden in the fur, was a faint tattoo, numbers barely visible under frostbite. Someone had tried to rub them out. He sat back, anger and confusion twisting together, but the dog's soft exhale pulled him back. The sound wasn't pain, it was trust. "Hang in there," he whispered. "We're almost home." The drive to the cabin was slow. The truck's tires clawed through the snow like an old ship fighting against waves. The storm was a living thing now, howling through the trees, bending them like old soldiers under fire. Ryan's headlights caught nothing but white. Still, he knew these turns by memory. When he finally saw the faint glow of his porch light through the snow, something inside him eased. He parked close, opened the door, and lifted the shepherd again. The animal's head rested against his shoulder, eyes half closed. Inside the cabin, warmth greeted them. Fireplace, cedar walls, the faint smell of burned coffee from the morning he'd left. He laid the dog on a wool blanket near the fire, then moved on, instinct boots off medkit open saline gauze antiseptic. The motions were second-nature muscle memory from years of patching up what life broke. The dog didn't resist. It watched him the whole time, those amber eyes steady, almost human. When he wrapped the paw, it sighed a sound closer to relief than pain. Ryan exhaled too, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. He poured a bit of water into a shallow bowl, and when the shepherd lifted its head to drink something in him, settled for the first time in months. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, there was silence and the crackle of the fire. Ryan sat beside the dog, both of them half lit by the shifting glow. He reached out, laid a hand on the fur still damp from melted snow. "You made it, soldier," he said softly. "Rest easy." The dog's tail moved once, a faint thump against the floor. For the first time that night, Ryan Cole allowed himself to smile. The fire had burned low by the time Ryan Cole began his second round of treatment. The German shepherd lay still on the wool blanket, eyes half open but steady. Outside, the storm clawed against the windows, each gust rattling the cabin's frame. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic melted snow and cedar smoke. Ryan moved methodically the way Marines do when every action has purpose. He cleaned each wound again, not trusting the first rinse. When he lifted the dog's leg, the beam from his headlamp caught faint lines along the skin stitches, old but neat, done by a practiced hand. They weren't from an animal clinic. They were precise, tight, and symmetrical, the kind of work he'd seen in field hospitals and canine medical units. His breath slowed. "You've been here before, haven't you?" he murmured. The dog's ear twitched as if it recognized the tone. He continued working, trimming away matted fur, disinfecting the deeper gashes, wrapping the paw with gauze he'd cut into perfect lengths. It was quiet work, but his thoughts refused to stay silent. The markings, the scars, the tactical collar, it all fit too neatly. This wasn't some stray dumped by a careless owner. This was a trained soldier, and someone had meant for him not to come back. When the bandages were secured, Ryan sat back on his heels and exhaled. The shepherd's breathing had steadied its ribs, rising and falling with quiet rhythm. Ryan reached for the metal bowl near the fire, poured a small amount of chicken broth from the pot, and slid it closer. The dog sniffed, then lapped slowly, exhaustion yielding to the smallest hint of trust. Ryan smiled faintly. "Good," he whispered. "That's how we start." He stayed near the fire, sipping from his mug, eyes tracing the shadows that danced across the wooden walls. The storm outside had softened to a constant hiss, the kind of sound that could lull a man into thinking he was safe. He wasn't sure he believed that anymore. He had seen too much to believe in peace that lasted. Still, something about the dog's calm breathing anchored him more than any prayer could. After a while, Ryan set down his mug and leaned closer. "Let's see what you remember," he said quietly. It was half curiosity, half instinct. He straightened his back, lowered his voice into the cadence he used on bass. "Sit." The shepherd's head lifted, eyes alert. Slowly it shifted weight and pushed itself upright, trembling, but responsive. Ryan blinked surprise mixing with recognition. He tried again. "Stay." The dog froze perfectly still. The commands weren't guesses, they were routine for a service canine. He hesitated, then switched languages. "Assis," he said the French command for sit. The shepherd obeyed again. Something deep stirred in Ryan's chest. He whispered the next one, almost without thinking, Pashto, a single sharp syllable from missions long past. The dog turned its head toward him, tail moving once. For a moment time folded. The heat of the Afghan desert pressed through the memory, the sound of rotors, the dry crack of distant gunfire, the bark of a handler giving orders beside him. He saw it as clear as the flame before him. He had been there when K9 teams took hits. He'd seen dogs drag wounded men from blast zones, their loyalty absolute, their courage unflinching. And now here was one of them left to die in a frozen cage. He rubbed a hand across his face, forcing the images back into silence. "You're one of ours," he said under his breath. The shepherd laid its head back down, eyes softening. Ryan didn't realize his hand had settled on the dog's shoulder until he felt the steady thump of its heart. The rhythm was strong now, certain. It wasn't just an animal's heartbeat, it was the same pulse that carried through every Marine unit he'd ever led. Unspoken, constant, loyal. He sat there for a long while, watching the snow fade from white fury to a slow, steady drift. The world outside had gone still. Somewhere between exhaustion and calm, he felt the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. It wasn't comfort. It was something quieter. A recognition. He looked at the dog again. "You made it out," he whispered. "So did I. Guess that means something." The shepherd's tail brushed the floor twice, deliberate and slow. Ryan leaned back, listening to the fire's low murmur. The storm was passing, but the questions it had carried were just beginning to settle. Morning broke slow and gray, as if the sun itself was reluctant to climb over the ridge. The storm had passed, leaving the world wrapped in white silence. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned to soft embers. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole stirred awake on the couch, his back stiff and his mind still caught between rest and readiness. Shadow lay near the hearth, his breathing calm, his body now more relaxed than it had been the night before. Ryan poured a cup of coffee, the steam rising in lazy curls, and watched the shepherd for a long moment. It felt strange, this quiet, the kind that usually comes before the next order, the next mission. He thought he'd left that behind when he signed the papers for temporary leave. But habit is a hard thing to break. He crouched beside Shadow and checked the bandages. The swelling had gone down. The stitches he'd redone held firm. The dog's eyes opened amber and alert, tracking his every movement. "You've got fight in you," Ryan said quietly. "Guess that makes two of us." He noticed again the collar, black, heavy-duty nylon, scuffed but not ordinary. It had seen field work. He lifted it gently, studying the frayed edges near the buckle. Something metallic glinted beneath a thin crust of frozen mud that had hardened around the steel plate. He took his pocket knife, scraped it clean, and wiped the surface dry. Beneath the grime was an engraving, MZ-12. Ryan froze, staring at the letters. The designation wasn't random. MZ-12 was the call sign for a classified Marine unit he'd worked with 3 years ago, a small, highly specialized team that handled K9 operations overseas, the kind of unit that didn't officially exist. He exhaled slowly, a low sound in the empty room. "That's not possible," he whispered. That unit had been dissolved after an ambush in Helmand Province. Most of the dogs were reassigned. 2 were listed as missing in action. He'd filed the report himself. Ryan looked at Shadow, who had turned his head toward him as if sensing the shift. "You were there," he said. "You were part of it." His pulse quickened. Whoever left this dog to die hadn't done it by accident. Someone wanted to erase MZ-12 completely, every trace, every name, even the animals that once carried those names in their tags. He stood and moved to the cabinet by the door, pulling out his old Marine pack. He hadn't touched it since coming home. Inside, everything was packed the same way it had been overseas field kit first aid rations, and at the bottom a short-range encrypted radio he'd kept more from sentiment than need. It hadn't worked in years. The battery pack was dead, the antenna cracked. Still habit drew him to it now. He set it on the table, brushed away the dust, and stared at the frequency dial. He turned it out of reflex, not expecting anything. The static filled the cabin, faint and uneven like ghosts talking through snow. He adjusted again. Suddenly a sharp click echoed from the speaker, followed by a short burst of tone. 3 beeps, pause, 2 beeps, another pause, then a single longer one. Ryan's breath caught. That pattern 321 was an identification call used only by MZ-12. He froze in place, the mug of coffee still steaming beside him. The sound repeated stronger now. It wasn't a broadcast, it was a pulse. Someone was sending out a locator ping on the old secure channel, but that channel had been decommissioned years ago. He turned the volume down the cabin, suddenly feeling too small, too exposed. The code meant one thing: either someone was alive from the unit or someone else had access to their system. Either way, it meant trouble. Ryan shut off the radio and listened to the silence afterward. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. He looked at Shadow, who had risen now, ears perked, body tense. The dog's eyes were fixed on the radio, as if recognizing a sound from its past. The connection between them wasn't imagination anymore. It was history resurfacing. Ryan moved toward the window. The forest outside was quiet, still heavy with snow, but nothing felt peaceful. The calm now had an edge, a kind of pressure that came before things broke loose. He set the radio back in the pack, zipped it, and glanced once more at the code etched on the collar. Whoever ran MZ-12 didn't want their ghosts found, and he had just tripped something buried deep. The realization settled cold in his stomach. He knelt beside Shadow and spoke softly. "Looks like we're not done yet, buddy." The dog tilted its head, listening as the wind outside began to shift again, whispering through the pines like distant static. The next day brought a silence that didn't feel right. The kind that settled too neatly, like snow covering something it shouldn't. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole stood on the porch of his cabin, mug of coffee warming his hands, scanning the white stretch of trees that wrapped the valley. The storm had cleared, but the world felt like it was holding its breath. Behind him, Shadow rested near the door, head on his paws, eyes following every small motion outside. The shepherd's wound had improved, but his posture remained alert, a soldier waiting for the next command. Ryan tried to shake the unease from his chest. He told himself the signal from the radio had probably been interference, an echo from another frequency. Still, the thought wouldn't leave him. Someone had pinged that channel, and that someone knew exactly where to find it. By noon, the light dimmed behind new clouds. The temperature dropped fast, the air sharp enough to bite. Ryan was refilling the woodpile beside the porch when he heard the distant hum of an engine, unfamiliar, deliberate. He turned. A black SUV crawled up the narrow road, snow crunching beneath its tires. No plow marks had cleared that path since the storm, meaning whoever they were, they had four-wheel drive and confidence. The vehicle stopped 20 feet from the porch. 2 men stepped out, both wearing dark coats with a circular patch stitched on the sleeve, Federal Wildlife Recovery. Ryan frowned. The patch looked official, but off the stitching, 2 knew the design just wrong enough to bother him. The taller man raised a hand in greeting, his smile thin and practiced. "Afternoon, sir. Sorry to bother you this far up," he said. We're with the Federal Wildlife Recovery Division. We're tracking an escaped subject, a biological asset that went missing during transport last night." Ryan set down the axe he'd been holding, resting it against the porch rail. "Biological asset," he repeated evenly. "You mean an animal?" The man nodded. "Yes, sir. Dangerous one, possibly injured. German Shepherd male, black and tan. Have you seen anything unusual after the storm?" Ryan studied them both carefully. The second man stood back near the SUV, pretending to check his clipboard but scanning the tree line instead. Neither wore standard federal boots or badges, and the SUV, clean black unmarked, had no front plate. He kept his expression calm. "I've seen a few coyotes, that's about it," he said. The taller man tilted his head slightly. "Coyotes don't leave cages behind," he said with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "If you do happen to notice anything, please contact us directly." He reached into his pocket, handed Ryan a laminated card. The contact number printed on it began with an area code Ryan knew didn't belong to any government office. Ryan nodded slowly. "I'll keep that in mind." The man tipped his head politely, signaling to his partner. "Stay safe up here," he said before turning back toward the vehicle. Snow kicked up under the tires as the SUV rolled back down the hill, its red taillights fading into the fog. Ryan stood still long after they were gone. Shadow had come to the door, ears up, body tense. The dog's low growl vibrated through the quiet. "Yeah," Ryan said softly. "I didn't like them either." He stepped off the porch, the crunch of his boots sharp against the snow. The air felt heavier now, charged in a way that reminded him of patrol nights overseas when the world seemed too still right before trouble came. He walked to where the SUV had been parked. The tire tracks were clean and symmetrical, but one detail caught his eye, a faint metallic glint under his truck. He knelt, brushed away the snow, and froze. A small rectangular device was attached beneath the chassis, black and smooth about the size of a lighter, with no visible markings except a blinking green light at one end. He didn't need a manual to know what it was. A magnetic tracker military issue, not civilian tech. He ran his gloved thumb over it, feeling the weight. Whoever those men were, they weren't from wildlife recovery. They were following a signal. His stomach tightened as he realized whose signal it might be. He reached for his multi-tool, pried the device loose, and slipped it into a lead-lined ammo box he kept in the truck bed. The blinking stopped instantly. Back inside, Ryan shut the door and stood still for a long time, listening to the quiet. The fireplace popped. Shadow lifted his head, watching him. "They're looking for you," Ryan said under his breath. The dog tilted its head as if understanding. Ryan rubbed a hand over his jaw. The old habits kicking in, evaluate, plan, secure. He checked the radio again. No more signals, only static. Still, he knew better than to wait for a second visit. He moved through the cabin, locking windows, checking sight lines, counting the rounds left in his sidearm. He had no idea who those men were, but they'd moved like professionals, not hunters. The federal patch was a costume. The unmarked car was a message. And the tracker. That was confirmation. They knew exactly where he was, and now they'd know he'd found them out. The sense of peace that had briefly existed between him and Shadow was gone. In its place stood the familiar pulse of anticipation, the same quiet before contact. As night began to fall again over Timber Ridge, Ryan stared into the fire and said quietly, "We've got company coming, partner. Let's be ready." The morning came pale and colorless, a sky of washed-out gray above the frozen trees. Ryan Cole hadn't slept much. Every sound through the night had carried weight, the settling of wood, the whisper of wind, the soft exhale of shadow near the fire. When dawn finally broke, he'd already made up his mind. Waiting wasn't a plan. The tracker on his truck, the fake agents, the radio signal, they were pieces of something larger, and he wasn't built to sit still while others moved first. He poured coffee into a thermos, pulled on his parka, and clipped a small camera to his chest pocket. Shadow was already awake, watching him with a sharp, unblinking focus. "You're coming," Ryan said. The shepherd stood favoring the injured leg, but steady. They left the cabin quietly, snow crunching under their boots and paws. The forest around Timber Ridge was hushed, the kind of silence that amplifies thought. The air smelled of pine and cold metal. Ryan moved cautiously, scanning for signs of movement, reading the ground like a map. He'd spent years learning how to see what others missed, the unnatural breaks in pattern, the weight of boots in soft soil. 100 yards from the cabin, Shadow stopped. His ears' pricked nose pointed toward the ridge trail. Ryan crouched, following the dog's line of sight. Half buried beneath a layer of new snow was a distinct tread pattern, 2 sets parallel fresh. He brushed away the powder with his glove. The design was unmistakable, the diamond grid sole of Marine-issued tactical boots. His heart tightened. He still owned a pair just like them tucked in his footlocker. Whoever had been here last night wasn't a lost hiker. They were trained, disciplined, and close. Shadow sniffed the tracks and let out a low growl that faded into a whine. Ryan placed a hand on his back, calming him. "Easy, partner," he murmured. He followed the footprints deeper into the trees. The path curved downhill where the snow grew thinner under the pines. Every few yards, Ryan paused, scanning, listening for movement. The prints led toward a small clearing not far from the frozen creek. There, scattered near a half-buried log, lay something that didn't belong in the wilderness. Ryan knelt beside it. The object was a translucent plastic cylinder capped on both ends, marked with faint blue lettering. He turned it over carefully. A tranquilizer dart casing. He'd seen plenty of them during his tours, used for sedating canine units or large animals during transport. But this one bore a logo stamped near the rim, Delta Sec International. Ryan's stomach sank. Delta Sec was a private defense contractor, one that had trained service dogs for several branches of the military, including his own. He'd worked with one of their handlers years ago, a man named Riker who'd vanished after a failed mission. Ryan stared at the logo, his breath misting in the cold air. The pieces began to shift in his mind. The coded radio signal, the fake agents, the collar marked MZ-12, and now this, the picture forming, was too deliberate to ignore. Shadow moved to the other side of the clearing, nose pressed against the snowtail, stiff. Ryan followed and saw what the dog had found, a shallow indentation where something heavy had been set down recently. The rectangular outline suggested a crate large enough for transport, maybe even a cage. He crouched, low eyes scanning the trees. Whoever had been here wasn't far, and they'd left in a hurry when the storm hit. Ryan picked up a handful of snow, rubbed it through his gloves, the cold clearing his thoughts. He'd stumbled into an operation that linked directly back to the military, his military, and that meant this wasn't an external threat. This was something inside the system. He pocketed the dart casing and took photos of the tracks, the clearing, and the area where the crate had rested. The air had shifted. He could feel it, that subtle change of rhythm the world takes when someone else is out there watching. He turned slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but the silence felt too complete. He straightened, voice low. "Let's go, Shadow." They retraced their steps, following their own tracks back toward the cabin. Each step felt heavier now, as if the snow itself carried the weight of what he'd learned. Back home, Ryan placed the dart casing on the table beside the tracker he'd recovered the day before. 2 different objects, same story, same reach. Shadow sat beside him, tail unmoving, eyes fixed on the door. "You were never lost," Ryan said quietly. "You were taken." The dog's ear twitched at the tone. Ryan's training told him to call someone, report the discovery, turn it over to command, but another part of him, the part that still believed in honor over protocol, whispered caution. If DeltaSec was involved, then the problem might reach further than he could imagine. He looked down at Shadow again. The dog's eyes reflected the light of the fire, steady waiting. "Looks like we've got our first lead," Ryan said. And if they're out there, they'll come back for you. He loaded a fresh round into his sidearm and glanced out the frosted window. Beyond the glass, the forest seemed to shift under the weight of the wind, every shadow a possible movement. The hunt had begun, and for the first time in months, Ryan felt his pulse align with purpose again. The storm clouds had not returned, but the world outside Ryan Cole's cabin felt just as heavy. He hadn't gone far from the window all morning. The tranquilizer casing and the tracker sat on the table like two accusations that refused to look away. Shadow lay near the fire, half asleep, but restless, one ear flicking every time the wind brushed against the walls. The sense of calm they'd shared had vanished, replaced by that old familiar pulse, the one that came before orders, before everything broke loose. Ryan turned the casing over in his fingers again. DeltaSec. He couldn't shake the name from his mind. He'd trained alongside some of their handlers in Helmand. The memories he'd buried beneath years of silence were surfacing, and each one carried the same scent of dust and cordite. He took a breath, rubbed the back of his neck, and tried to focus. That was when his phone buzzed. The number on the screen froze him mid-motion. It was a direct line from Command Operations, a channel not used for casual calls. He hesitated for half a second before answering. Staff Sergeant Cole, a voice said, clipped and official. It belonged to Major Alan Reeves, his current CO. You want to tell me why an encrypted frequency tied to MZ-12 just lit up from your location? Ryan straightened instinctively, his tone steady but measured. Sir, I'm not sure what you mean. I've been off duty and that frequency's been decommissioned for years. Reeves didn't sound convinced. That's not what our tech team says. It activated 48 hours ago, broadcast short-range old protocol signature. Yours, Cole. And now we've got chatter that 2 men with fake credentials were seen heading toward your sector. You want to tell me what's going on? Ryan's pulse slowed the way it always did when things turned dangerous. I found a wounded shepherd after the storm, he said carefully. It's military trained, sir. Tattoo and collar match, MZ-12. Someone left it to die. I think they're looking for him. Silence stretched on the other end before Reeves spoke again, quieter now. Cole, that unit's been buried for a reason. You're walking into something that doesn't want daylight. Stay out of it. That's an order. Ryan's jaw clenched. With respect, sir, I can't do that. Someone's cleaning house. The Major's sigh came through faintly. You always had trouble following orders. Whatever you found, it's not yours to fix. I'm sending a recovery team to your coordinates. Sit tight. The line went dead. Ryan lowered the phone slowly. The words echoed in his head, buried for a reason. He looked down at Shadow, who was watching him now, alert and unblinking. You were a part of MZ-12, he murmured, and I was the one who gave the final order to pull out. The realization hit like a blow. The night Helmand burned back into his mind, smoke sand the barking of dogs amid gunfire. They'd lost 2 handlers and 1 K9 unit that night. The dog's call sign had been Echo 3. Ryan had been the one to call the extraction before the team recovered him. He closed his eyes, the weight of it pressing against his ribs. If Shadow was Echo 3, then this wasn't just a coincidence. It was a reckoning. Before he could process further, a sound broke the quiet, a dull thump outside, followed by the crunch of tires on snow. Ryan's hand went instinctively to his sidearm. He stepped to the window. A delivery truck idled at the edge of the clearing. The driver face, half hidden by a scarf, placed a brown parcel on the porch before backing away without a word. The vehicle turned and disappeared down the trail. Ryan waited until the sound faded completely, then opened the door cautiously. The package bore no label, no return address, only his name in block letters. Inside, he sliced the tape open. A small USB drive sat inside a padded case along with a note that read, only, "You left us there." His breath caught. He plugged the drive into his old laptop and the screen flickered to life. The video began with static, then stabilized. Desert. Night vision green. Voices in the background, his own among them, calm, giving orders through the comms. Echo team, secure the perimeter. Move the K9 units east. The footage panned to a German shepherd in full tactical harness. Panting eyes, sharp tail steady. Shadow. There was no mistaking it. The timestamp in the corner matched the night of the Helmand ambush. Ryan watched in silence as the chaos unfolded, gunfire dust shouting. Then came his own voice again, recorded through the helmet cam. All teams fall back. Extraction in 60. The camera turned, catching a final image, the shepherd sprinting toward a collapsing wall as the handler went down. The feed cut abruptly. Ryan sat frozen, the glow of the screen washing over him. He remembered that night the call he'd made, the withdrawal order that left one unit behind. The guilt he'd locked away for years now had a face, a heartbeat, a name. Shadow had lifted his head, eyes fixed on the screen. The dog moved closer, nose almost touching the faint outline of his younger self. Ryan swallowed hard. You were there, he whispered, and I left you. The words hung heavy, raw, and quiet. Outside, the wind began to rise again, pushing snow against the windows. For the first time since he came home, Ryan felt the full weight of what he'd carried all along, not just the loss, but the unfinished duty that now stood breathing beside him. By the time Ryan Cole returned from town, the light was fading fast. The mountains were turning the color of cold steel, and the snow along the ridge had begun to crust over with ice. He had spent the day trying to send encrypted files to his former unit's archive, but every attempt failed. The system rejected the data as restricted classified. Now, as he approached the clearing where his cabin stood, something in the air felt off. The birds were gone. Even the wind sounded wrong. He slowed the truck headlights, cutting through the white stillness. The front door of the cabin was ajar, swaying slightly with the gusts. His pulse tightened. He cut the engine, stepped out, and drew his weapon instinctively. Footprints marked the snow around the porch, 3 sets, heavy, deliberate. The lock had been forced splinters scattered like shrapnel on the ground. Shadow, he called softly. No answer. He moved inside, weapon raised, clearing each corner as if back on patrol. The air inside smelled faintly of gun oil and cedar, but also something metallic. Blood. It streaked the floor near the table, dark against the wood. His laptop, the military issue one, was gone. So were the files, the drive, even the radio. His heart dropped until a low whine came from the bedroom. He turned the corner fast. Shadow lay under the bed, unharmed, but alert, tail-stiff chest rising quick. A small cut marked the fur above his shoulder, fresh but not deep. Easy partner, Ryan whispered, lowering his weapon. You're okay. He checked the rest of the room. Whoever had come knew what they were looking for. Nothing else had been touched, no food, no cash, no tools. Only the equipment tied to MZ-12. He knelt beside the dog, examining the wound. It wasn't from a bullet. The shape was narrow, precise, almost surgical. Whoever had tried to take Shadow had hesitated or been stopped. Ryan noticed faint streaks of blood near the doorway leading outside. He followed them out to the porch where the trail vanished into the woods. The snow had covered most of it, but he saw enough to know someone had bled heavily and retreated. He stood in the doorway, scanning the dark line of trees, his breath visible in the freezing air. You fought back, didn't you? He said quietly, glancing at Shadow. The shepherd's ears twitched, and for a brief moment Ryan felt both pride and dread. If they had come once, they would come again. Back inside, he began assessing what he still had. The tracker, the dart casing the collar, all still there. He gathered them on the table, setting each item in a neat line, the way he'd been trained to process evidence. As he moved one of the planks by the hearth to check for damage, the wood shifted under his hand. The sound was hollow. He frowned, pried it up with the edge of his knife, and froze. Inside the narrow gap between the beams lay a small leather pouch coated in dust. It looked old, forgotten, yet carefully hidden. He pulled it out, untied the strap, and found a second collar identical to Shadow's but newer, cleaner. Attached beneath the lining was a thin metal capsule no larger than his thumb. He twisted it open. A micro SD card slid out, wrapped in plastic. His heartbeat quickened. He inserted it into the camera mounted on his desk and turned on the screen. The footage was grainy handheld, but the content hit like a strike. Rows of cages, dogs inside, some wounded, some sedated. Men in tactical gear moved between them, wearing patches with the DeltaSec International insignia. A voice off camera, one he half recognized, said, "These are the unfit ones. Insurance claims filed as training casualties. Prep for disposal." The next frame showed a document on a clipboard listing unit designations MZ-12 among them. His name appeared in the authorization section. His throat tightened. "No," he whispered. "I never signed that." But the digital signature at the bottom was his. The truth formed painfully clear. DeltaSec hadn't just trained canines, they'd been profiting from their destruction. Injured or retired dogs were listed as lost in action, their insurance funds absorbed by the company, their remains erased. And someone inside the system had used his old credentials to cover it. Ryan shut off the device, the screen going black. The room fell silent except for the soft pop of the fire. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the conflict between duty and conscience. If he released this, it would expose a crime. But the data was marked classified. Reporting it would mean breaching military secrecy, an act that could end his career, or worse. Shadow shifted beside him, resting his head on Ryan's knee. The simple weight of that touch steadied him more than any order ever had. He looked down at the dog, the one he'd left years ago, the one now giving him a chance to do right. "They used you," he said softly. "Used all of us." His eyes hardened. "Not anymore." He packed the collar, the SD card, and the evidence into a metal case and sealed it shut. Somewhere deep in his chest, the Marine in him stirred awake, not to obey orders this time, but to protect what was right. Outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying with it the faint echo of tires on snow. Someone was coming back for what they'd lost. The next morning came without sunlight. The air hung thick and gray over Cedar Ridge as though the storm had taken the color with it when it passed. Ryan Cole stood outside his cabin, gear-packed eyes fixed on the horizon. The decision had already been made. He couldn't turn the evidence over to command, it would disappear before sunrise. But he couldn't bury it either. There was one person he trusted with both truth and silence. Sergeant Tom Avery, his closest friend from Helmand, a man who'd saved his life once and never called it a debt. Ryan drove 2 hours down the mountain shadow, curled in the back seat. The town below was small, a mix of brick and frost, its streets half hidden under thawing snow. Tom's workshop sat at the edge of town, a repair shop for heavy equipment, its sign faded by years of wind. When Ryan stepped inside, the smell of oil and pine greeted him. Tom stood by a workbench, sleeves rolled up, his once blonde hair streaked with gray. He turned surprised but not unwelcoming. "Cole," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't think I'd see you till spring." Ryan gave a faint nod. "Couldn't wait that long." He laid the metal case on the bench. "I need your help." Tom's easy smile faded as he caught the weight in Ryan's tone. They sat. Ryan explained everything: the dog, the tracker, the men in the SUV, the stolen files, the footage from DeltaSec. When he was done, the only sound was the ticking of the space heater. Tom rubbed his face, eyes distant. "DeltaSec," he muttered. "My kid brother's with them. Logistics out in Nevada. Says they handle training contracts." Ryan met his gaze. "They handle more than that." He opened the case and showed him the footage: still frame cages, handlers, sedated dogs. Tom's jaw tightened. "You're saying they're killing service animals to fake claims?" Ryan nodded. And using our names to do it. Tom stood pacing. You realize what this means, right? If they've buried this deep, it's not just them. Someone higher signed off. He looked toward the window where the snow was starting again, soft and quiet. If my brother's part of this, even by accident. He didn't finish the sentence. Ryan leaned forward, voice steady. I'm not here to expose him. I just need to stop them from doing it again. I can't do it alone. Tom stared at the floor for a long moment, then finally nodded. All right. No paperwork, no calls. Just us. That evening, they drove to the far end of town where the small Cedar Ridge Veterinary Clinic stood under a flickering porch light. Inside, Dr. Michael Henson was finishing up his shift. The old vet looked up when Ryan entered, surprise flashing across his lined face. You look like a man who hasn't slept in days, Henson said. And that dog of yours still walks like a Marine. Ryan didn't waste time. He placed the tranquilizer casing and the dart syringe on the counter. You've seen this compound before, haven't you? Henson took the syringe, turning it under the light. His jaw tightened. Yes, he said after a pause. Used to come in under supply orders from private contractors. They claimed it was for rehabilitation. He hesitated, eyes darkening. But I was ordered to treat dogs that shouldn't have been there, service canines from classified units, some with tracking chips erased. All off record. When I asked questions, the orders stopped. The next month, my clinic caught fire. Electrical accident, they said. Tom folded his arms. You're telling me they've been moving the dogs through civilian channels? Henson nodded. They use small-town vets, no oversight, no paperwork. They sedate them, claim they died during surgery, and ship the bodies out before sunrise. His voice broke slightly. Some of them still had fight in their eyes. Ryan clenched his fists but kept his tone controlled. Doc, I've got proof now. Not much, but enough to make someone nervous. I'm going to bring this to light, but I need a team that won't disappear the second this gets loud. Henson looked at the dog sitting patiently by the door, then back at Ryan. You've already got your first soldier, he said quietly. Count me as the second. Tom exhaled, half a sigh, half a vow. And I'll bring the truck and the gear. My brother's stationed near a Delta Sec depot in Glen Rock. If anyone can get us inside, it's him. We just have to make him believe it's the right side. Ryan nodded. We move tomorrow night. No calls, no comms. We go dark. Henson placed a hand on his shoulder, the old soldier's grip firm. You know this isn't just about the dogs, right? It's about what they turned us into. Ryan met his eyes. Then it's time to take that back. As they left the clinic, the snow had begun to fall again, gentle but unrelenting. The road ahead glowed faintly under the headlights, stretching toward the dark horizon. Shadow lay between the seats, head on Ryan's boot, eyes calm but awake. For the first time in weeks, Ryan felt something he hadn't since leaving the Marines, not rage, not fear, but purpose. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, not for orders, not for medals, but for honor. The storm clouds returned as if summoned, rolling low and heavy over Glen Rock Airfield. The night was sharp with wind, the kind that carried distance like a whisper. Ryan Cole crouched behind a snow-dusted fuel tank, eyes fixed on the warehouse 50 yards ahead. The building sat at the edge of the abandoned runway, its corrugated metal walls stained by years of neglect. But the faint orange light bleeding through the cracks said otherwise. Someone was inside. Behind him, Tom Avery adjusted the strap on his rifle, his breath steady despite the cold. Dr. Henson waited near the truck with the radio jammer ready to cut communications once they entered. Shadow pressed close to Ryan's leg muscles, tense eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Through the binoculars, Ryan counted 3 guards outside, 2 near the door and 1 patrolling the east side. Their movements were synchronized, precise, not rent-a-cops, but trained men. He recognized the discipline immediately. They're pros, he whispered to Tom. "Private security detail." Tom nodded. "My brother said this place was cleared out years ago. Guess someone forgot to tell them." Ryan's grip tightened on his sidearm. Not for long. They waited until the patrol disappeared around the corner. Then, moving like shadows themselves, they crossed the open ground. The snow muffled their steps. At the door, Tom cut the chain with bolt cutters wrapped in cloth to mute the sound. The metal gave way with a dull snap. They slipped inside. The air smelled of chemicals and iron. The light came from a few flickering halogen lamps hung along the rafters. Crates lined the walls, wooden, labeled with export codes, none of them military. But what made Ryan's stomach tighten were the cages stacked in rows near the center. Inside them lay dogs. German shepherds, Malinois labs, all unconscious, their bodies still but breathing. Each had an IV line taped to its leg, a small tag clipped to the collar marked with serial numbers. Some bore the faded tattoo patterns of military K9 units. "Dear God," Henson's voice whispered through the earpiece. "They're moving them out of the country." Ryan lifted one of the tags. "Property transfer. Delta Sec International. Destination Baku." He exhaled slowly. "They're exporting them for private contractors, selling what's left of their loyalty." Tom's jaw clenched. "That's blood money." Before Ryan could reply, the sound of boots echoed from the back corridor. They ducked behind a row of crates. 3 armed men entered, one checking a clipboard. The tallest, broad-shouldered, with a scar down his jaw, spoke in a tone Ryan recognized, commanding, confident military. "Finish loading Section 3. We move them before sunrise." Shadow stiffened, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest. Ryan glanced down and froze. The dog's eyes had locked onto the tall man. Something old and raw flickered there, recognition. Ryan whispered, "Shadow easy," but the shepherd's ears went back, muscles coiling. The man turned toward the sound, his expression shifting in surprise. "Echo 3. He said, disbelief cutting through his voice. "You're supposed to be gone." Ryan understood instantly. This man wasn't just a guard. He was one of Delta Sec's former K9 handlers, the one who had trained Shadow before Helmand. The realization came too late. The man raised his weapon. Ryan pushed forward to intercept, shouting down. The shot cracked, slicing through the cold air. Pain bloomed across Ryan's side as the impact drove him to one knee. Shadow barked once, a sound that shattered the silence torn between command and instinct. For a moment, the world froze, the handler's eyes locked with the dog's, a silent battle of memory and allegiance. Then Shadow moved. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a force as pure as survival. He lunged, hitting the handler full force, teeth sinking into the man's arm. The weapon clattered away. The other guards turned, shouting, but Tom's rifle barked once, twice, clean and controlled. 2 men dropped before they could return fire. The third fled toward the far exit. Ryan pressed a hand to his wound, blood seeping between his fingers, but his focus stayed on the shepherd. Shadow held fast until the handler stilled, then released, chest heaving, muzzle streaked with red. The man lay, conscious, eyes wide, with something between guilt and recognition. "He was my best," the handler gasped. "You don't understand," Ryan cut him off quietly. "I understand perfectly. You taught him loyalty. You just forgot what it means." Tom helped Ryan to his feet while Henson's voice came through the radio. "You've got company incoming, 2 trucks from the south gate." Ryan glanced around. "We can't save all of them tonight. We take what we can." He opened the nearest cage, then another, cutting the IV lines gently. The dog stirred weakly, confused but alive. Shadow limped to his side, panting, eyes sharp again. "Good boy," Ryan whispered. "You chose right." They loaded as many cages as they could into the truck before the floodlights outside blazed to life. Engines roared in the distance. Tom slammed the rear door shut. "That's all we get." Ryan nodded, clutching the case of evidence under his arm. Then it'll have to be enough. As they sped away into the storm, the warehouse behind them erupted in light and sirens fading into the snowy dark. Inside the cab, Ryan leaned back, pressing a makeshift bandage against his side. Shadow rested his head on his leg, eyes half closed. "You saved me," Ryan said softly. Again. The dog's tail moved once. For the first time in years, Ryan felt the meaning of the word trust return, not as a command, but as a choice freely made. Dawn crept over Cedar Ridge 3 days after the warehouse raid, turning the snowfields gold where the sun touched them. The storm had passed, but its scars remained in tire tracks, bloodstains frozen in the ice, and the deep fatigue written across every face that had survived the night. Ryan Cole stood at the edge of the airfield, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of antiseptic. His side was bandaged, his breathing shallow but steady. Around him, military vehicles and investigators moved with quiet purpose. The chaos had ended, replaced by the slow order of accountability. Helicopters circled above their rotors, slicing the cold air into fragments. Tom Avery stood beside him, bruised but alive, giving his statement to an officer. Dr. Henson was helping the medics check the rescued dogs now resting in heated transport crates. 41 of them alive and safe. Shadow lay near Ryan's feet, still limping, his fur matted but eyes alert. Every few minutes someone walked past and gave a quiet nod, a gesture of acknowledgement. No medals, no speeches, just the unspoken language of soldiers who understood sacrifice when they saw it. By afternoon, Major Alan Reeves arrived by helicopter. His uniform was immaculate despite the snow. He approached Ryan with that familiar mix of authority and restraint. "Staff Sergeant Cole," he said, his tone unreadable. "You gave us quite a week." Ryan straightened automatically. "Yes, sir." Reeves held out a file folder. "Your report reads like something out of a field manual crossed with a miracle. 41 service dogs recovered from illegal export, a black market ring tied to DeltaSec dismantled, and evidence directly linking corporate officers to insurance fraud and falsified casualty reports." He paused, letting the words hang between them. "You also conducted an unsanctioned operation on restricted property, used decommissioned equipment, and discharged a firearm without authorization." Ryan nodded once. "Yes, sir." Reeves looked at him for a long moment before closing the folder. Under normal circumstances, that would end a career. Ryan met his gaze. Under normal circumstances, sir, those dogs would still be in cages. The faintest smile tugged at Reeves's mouth, the kind of smile men in command rarely let anyone see. "Point taken," he said quietly. "You'll receive a formal reprimand for operating outside your chain of command. But off the record, command has decided not to pursue further action. You're alive and you brought them home. That counts for something." Ryan exhaled slowly, the tension finally beginning to lift. Reeves added, "Your actions initiated an internal investigation. DeltaSec's defense contracts have been suspended. The Pentagon wants to make sure this never happens again." He hesitated before continuing. "They've also asked for you." Ryan frowned. "Sir, you're being reassigned," Reeves said, his tone softening. "Not to combat, but to purpose. The Corps is establishing a new rehabilitation initiative pairing retired service dogs with veterans suffering from trauma. They're calling it the Second Watch Program. They want you to run it." For a moment, Ryan didn't speak. The wind moved through the airfield, carrying the faint barking of the rescued dogs as they were loaded for transport. He looked down at Shadow, who had lifted his head, eyes fixed on him as if waiting for an order. "A second watch," Ryan said quietly, the words tasting like something sacred. Reeves nodded. "You've already got your first recruit." 2 months later, the winter broke. Snow melted into streams that ran down the mountain, filling the valley with the first green in months. The new training compound stood near the edge of Cedar Ridge, built from the shell of an old ranger station. Its yard was fenced wide, filled with dogs of all breeds, some with scars, some still limping, all learning to trust again. Ryan walked along the fence line with Shadow trotting beside him, now wearing a new vest embroidered with the program's emblem, a silver shield crossed with a paw print. Tom Avery was there too, helping install equipment with a few younger Marines. Dr. Henson ran the medical wing, his hands steady, his voice patient. The first group of veterans had arrived, a mix of men and women from across the country, carrying the kind of quiet pain no words could cure. But when they knelt beside those dogs, something wordless passed between them, understanding loyalty and the promise of one more chance. One afternoon, a news crew came to film the program's launch. The reporter asked Ryan what the second watch meant to him. He thought for a long moment before answering. "It means service doesn't end when the uniform comes off," he said. "It means what we save can save us back." Shadow stood beside him, tail low, posture proud. The camera caught them both in the same frame, man and dog, survivor and symbol. As the day ended, the sun sank low behind the pines, casting long golden shadows across the training yard. Ryan leaned against the fence, watching the new pairs train, each command met with trust, each hesitation answered by patience. Shadow sat at his side, eyes fixed on the horizon. Ryan reached down, resting a hand on his neck. "We did all right, didn't we?" he said softly. The shepherd looked up, tail thumping once as if in agreement. The sound of laughter drifted from the yard, the kind that comes when broken things begin to mend. For the first time in years, Ryan felt at peace, not because the war was over, but because he'd found a new one worth fighting the quiet battle to heal. As evening settled, the flag outside the compound caught the last light of day, fluttering in slow, steady rhythm. Behind it, the sign read, "The Second Watch Program, for those who served and those who still do." Ryan turned toward the cabin that served as his office, Shadow following close. The night air carried the faint scent of cedar and spring thaw. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, storms still brewed, but here in this small corner of Colorado, calm had found its place again. If this story moved, you don't just scroll away. Hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you think really happened that night in Cedar Ridge. Where are you watching from? I read every story, every memory you share. It keeps this mission alive.